I'm going to go ahead and call the committee meeting on affordability, accountability, and planning to order. I'd like to welcome everyone for being here today. Today's meeting should be relatively efficient, is what some of the hopes are. Also, please be advised that this meeting is being broadcast over the internet, and everyone please behave appropriately, I guess. Agenda item number 2 is consideration of approval of the minutes from the June 25th meeting of the committee. Any questions or discussions as to the minutes? If not, I need a motion. I have a motion to approve and a second. Second, Sada. Thank you. All in favor of the motion say aye. Aye. Opposed, same. Agenda item number 3 is consideration of approval of the consent calendar, and there are no items on the consent calendar at the moment. Are there any items that anyone would like to move to the consent calendar? I need a second for approval, I guess, of the non-existent consent calendar. I guess we don't have to do that since we don't have any on there, David. Yeah. I'm surprised you didn't.
I'm modern and mellow.
Thank you. Yes, you are. Wow. All right. Moving rapidly along. Agenda item number 4 is public testimony on items relating to the Committee on Affordability, Accountability, and Planning. And I do not have anybody signed up or registered for that, so we will move on to agenda item 5A, which is consideration of adopting the staff recommendation to the committee relating to approval of the 2014 Regional Plan for Texas Higher Education. Ginger Gossman, Director of Planning, and Julie Eklund, Deputy Commissioner for Planning and Accountability, will provide a short presentation. Welcome, and I'll let you all take it from there.
Thank you. Good morning, and thank you for having us. I'm Ginger Gossman, and this is Julie Eklund. Texas is divided into 10 higher education regional regions, which vary considerably by size and by population. So just as it is important to understand that we have different kinds of institutions in the state and to look at their similarities and differences, it is also important to understand that we have different regions in the state and to look at their similarity and differences. The data in the regional plan is color-coded to match the map that you see here. Note that in your copy of the presentation, the last 10 slides include each of the regions for you to look at. They won't be part of my regular presentation, but we thought you'd find those informative. The regional plan has been a statutory requirement since the 77th legislature in 2011, and these are the main directives of that statute. It's published every 2 years and sent to the legislature by November 1st, prior to the legislative session. We post the regional plan online in a companion tool called the Regional Portal. The portal is available to everyone and contains a plethora of regional data. The portal has become a popular site for educational researchers and for institutional researchers, and use of the portal is growing among our K-12 partners as they begin to plan for House Bill 5. So, for example, education research centers are finding the portal very useful now. The regional portal also includes data on workforce and occupation, but we're going to defer to the RAND presentation happening earlier today on that topic. The regional plan is designed to address the goals and closing the gaps by 2015. Enrollment as a percent of total population is a crude measure, but it demonstrates the value of looking at regions because it shows there's variation across the state where students are enrolled. Statewide enrollment has increased by over 2% since the fall of 2011, which was the data used in the last regional report. But enrollment did not keep pace with population growth, which was over 4%. So as a result, these percentages have fallen slightly statewide and for all regions except for the Gulf Coast. The greatest percentage declines, again, they were slight, were for regions with a red star. In about half of our regions, enrollment fell while population grew between fall 2011 and fall 2013. Note that in your copy of the presentation, there is a page number in the bottom left corner, and that is the page in the report where you'll find these source data. Enrollment is just one part of the educational pipeline. We have an ongoing project called the 8th grade cohort study that identifies where there are leaks in this pipeline. Our most recent analysis tracks students who entered the 8th grade in 2003 and follows these students through high school enrollment and graduation and then college enrollment and graduation. Percentages shown here are the percentages of the original cohort, so the 8th grade cohort is always the denominator. These data are shared with the Texas Tribune annually, and they post them on their website. We publish the regional cohort data in the regional report. For the most part, there was not wide variation by region in terms of these percentages, so today we're sharing you the data from the statewide cohort. Statewide, we lost students at every transition point, but there were 2 points where the loss was great. 32.2% of the 8th graders did not graduate from high school. 32.5% of those who enrolled in higher ed did not complete. The 6-year graduation rate for this cohort may seem small, but it has grown over time. It has increased slightly every year since 1996, when our statewide completion rate for the 8th grade cohort was just 17.7%. To fully understand enrollment trends, it's useful to know whether enrollment is in or out of region. This is important information for regional planners because it helps them see if their high school graduates enroll in their same region. And in most regions, there is a propensity of students to enroll near home. There were a few noteworthy exceptions. These findings demonstrate regional capacity for higher education. There is one public university in the Northeast, Midwestern University. There are 4 community colleges and 1 technical college, but none of these are centrally located in the region. The Upper East region has 2 public universities, Texas A&M University Texarkana and UT Tyler. Students at 2-year institutions tend to enroll in their home region more often than university students. We define high demand as the number of graduates in a program. And as this slide demonstrates, the majority of our high demand awards are really in a minority of our programs. As better workforce data become available, we may revisit how we define high demand awards to be more labor market driven than student interest driven. This concentration of awards is similar to trends that we've seen in the past. These data include distance education programs, which play a vital role in serving students regionally. This is a preview of the regional portal, which includes maps of all of the regions, as well as everything shown in the presentation here. And that concludes our overview of the regional plan.
Yes, any questions from the committee? Harold?
Ginger, if I understand the leak slide, if we're having a huge influx of population. If a student was not in the 8th grade cohort, they were in the 9th grade when they moved to Texas. Are they not included? I mean, is there a spillover, or are we missing students that are moving in, kids that are moving in from out of state? Or
we are capturing them at other data points or in other data reports that we publish, but for this particular study, it is designed to look at to begin with the 8th grade cohort.
You have to drive the stake in the ground somewhere.
Yes.
Okay.
Janelle?
I really liked the report. It was educational for me, so thank you.
Thank you.
Commissioner?
I'd like to call attention to a couple of things in this report. First of all, the fact that virtually 90% of community college students go to college close to home. That fact allows for any number of opportunities to work on good articulation agreements, because we know where those community college students are going to end up. The likelihood is that they will continue to go to school in their neighborhood. So instead of thinking about very complex articulation agreements that are statewide, we should focus on articulation agreements regionally, and that's much less difficult. The other thing is that these numbers, the leakage in the pipeline between higher education enrollment and actual completion are really appalling and give us a wonderful opportunity to focus our efforts and help achieve the very ambitious goals of our next strategic plan. We don't know exactly what it will be, but Woody Hunt has made it very clear it's going to be much more ambitious than the previous one. So there's that opportunity here to make some very dramatic strides in very important areas.
And just along those lines, backing up to where 90% students go to the two-year in region, well, what happens, where do they go if they want to go on to the next 2 years, the next 4 years? Do we have any data that says where they're going after that?
That's not something that we've looked at specifically. Generally, I think the commissioner is correct when he says that most of those students stay within region, but we will go back and take a look.
And that's what I mean. It just seems to me that we got to make sure that there's a place for them to go in region, because they are obviously already predisposed to stay close to home and make sure that there's plenty of opportunities under that articulation.
Correct.
And that way works very smoothly.
And we do have a report that shows students who, from where they go to community college, where they transfer to the actual institution. So we can take that and we can sort that out by region for you. But we do see students staying nearby in many cases.
You can disaggregate students that are in residence at universities who transferred as opposed to those who are taking online courses from, say, WGU or a university that has ample online baccalaureate programs, correct?
Yes, because we get information about enrollment from the career and for-profit colleges, we're able to look and see where the students are, where they live, if we have that information, if they've gone to high school in Texas, and then where they are enrolled, whether it's online or in a face-to-face program.
Actually, we have all kinds of data on the movement of students. Yes. They're just not in this report. And it's not done specifically by region, but we do know for a community college, you can look online right now and see which universities they've gone to, so long as it fits their FERPA requirement. You can also see how well they're doing in terms of grade point when they transfer. And you can do this by university. You can look at university and see where they're getting community college students. So you can look at it from both ends. You can look at a community college and see where their students are going, or you can look at a university and see what community colleges are feeding in. So, but while 90% stay, 10% is a significant number of students that are going elsewhere. And so it's a good question, and we perhaps should do a specific. I mean, we do have specific reports in the sense that they're online, but we haven't put out a paper report.
David?
Yeah, so I want to compliment you on the study. I think it's very informative. I think I'm disheartened, but I'm also emboldened. When we know that 68% of the workforce in the year 2020 needs some type of a higher education certification, and we're not even getting 68% of the 8th graders to graduate from high school, we got a tremendous problem and a tremendous opportunity here. And I guess I would ask the commissioner, you obviously are working with the Workforce Commissioner and the Education Commissioner, TEA. What is it that we are collectively going to do differently, very differently, to reverse this? This is just unacceptable. What do we have to do to help them to accomplish a better success of high school graduation? Because there's no higher ed without high school graduation.
Well, we're working on several fronts. I think, first of all, we're working together to make sure that we follow up on the specifics of House Bill 5 to make sure students are getting the academic counseling they need to make thoughtful choices about which of the endorsements to take. I think there's a recognition. Some of you may have followed the controversy in the State Board of Education about some AP courses. I think it's very clear that we need to do a better job of coordinating common notions of college readiness across the two sectors. We're working on that. I think it's also very clear that higher education is going to have to do a better job of providing professional development for in-place teachers to teach up to adequate levels of college and career readiness. Those are the areas that we're focusing on.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
Chairman?
Yes, sir.
So thank you again, and I think as everyone has complimented, this is a very interesting read, and thank you for that. I am looking at these 10 regions that you have shown here, out of which 5 have these stars, which are suggesting that the enrollment is falling. Based on what I see here, 60% of the kids not going into the not even enrolling. What are some of the most weakest regions in those out of those 5? Is there a cluster, or they are just out there somewhere? In those 5 stars, which is there an area where you would say these 3 regions back to back are the most weak ones?
Well, I wouldn't use the term weak.
Yeah.
I could explain to you that the data, there were some regions where the enrollment fell at a faster rate than the population grew, because that's what the star is. Enrollment went down, but population went up. But in some of these regions, it was a fairly even turn. There was one where it seemed disproportionate, and that was in the Northwest, where the drop in enrollment was as much, if not a little bit more proportionately than the rise in population. There were, for example, in South Texas, there was a large drop in enrollment, but their population grew dramatically. So even though there's a red star, I wouldn't say that there was a big story there.
And notice that one of the things all these areas have in common is they're close to significant economic activity. The Eagle Ford Shale, which obviously affects parts of South Texas, the activity in the Midland, Odessa area, which not only affects West Texas but also Northwest, the southwestern regions of the Northwest Texas. I think those are phenomena that we've looked at pretty closely, right, David?
The staff have meet on Fridays to go over various data, and we've looked very closely at the issue of the oil and gas industry and increases, and looked at wage record data and looked at people actually going into the workforce directly following high school. We had heard a great deal about very high-paying jobs. We didn't really find many, but then we realized that for a high school graduate, making $25,000 or $28,000 is a lot of money compared to what they're used to, and we saw many of those jobs, but there are jobs in sort of that mid-range as well. So we've looked at that to see what's happening. We've have at least explored in a preliminary way the possibility of working with some of the companies to provide access to some courses while at the job location. We haven't had any success yet, but we're going to continue to pursue that. But that's absolutely true about the oil and gas industry. We're concerned particularly about South Texas because this is such a large population. Even given that, we want to make sure that once students have gone out into that workplace that we can recover them and get them back in, because as you know, that industry is cyclical. They're believing it's going to, at least in the Midland, Odessa area, they believe there's going to be a longer horizon than in the past. But some of these jobs are short-term. So, I've talked to folks and they explain, well, sometimes you have to build roads then for the trucks to get to. Then the trucks go out there, but some of these jobs don't last long. I talked with someone in Victoria who had lost, who runs an oil and gas depot and had lost a number of truckers, but they've already come back saying they want their jobs because what they had found in another part of the state that was more high paying was they could see that it was already about to die out for those particular jobs. So we're going to have to keep our eye on it.
And David, I appreciate that thought along those lines, because I think that phenomenon is an important factor. I mean, when it hits these numbers like this, and are we serving our? I'm also curious: are those kids coming out prepared for even those jobs? They're able to get what looks like a good job, and we're talking so much more today about workforce development and preparedness in that context. I'm curious as to what that looks like, but I just think this is one of those phenomenon that we've got to keep an eye on, and I appreciate that it is a focal point for you.
Yeah, and that's an important point. Not everyone can just get in a large truck and drive it.
Right.
That does take some skill. I know, Mr. Heldenfels in our business had difficulty finding enough truckers, so you can't necessarily just walk out of high school and walk into one of those jobs. So the workforce is a dynamic environment, and that's why we're going to put much more emphasis on it in terms of our staff analysis over the coming years. In fact, you may recall in our LAR, we only made a request for one additional staff person, but we needed at least one more person that would do analysis on a daily basis. That's all they would do, along with other staff that would be spending much more time.
Mr. Chairman, the reason, and again, Ginger, by choice, I'm using the word weak, is that my concern is that I was reading this report, and it says that students are more likely to stay within the region for higher education than to enroll in other region. What it tells me is that if there is a weak region, and we are consistently asking these students from the higher school to go to the schools there, my concern is that if the region is being replenished by a weak environment, then I just don't want to see a region falling off the cliff. That's what I was asking.
One thing that I noticed in looking at this data is because we have seen in the last couple of years our enrollments drop at community colleges, I think some of that may be reflected in this data. For example, in Central Texas, where we have our two flagships as well as Texas State University, some other large universities, we have not seen the enrollment drop, but and overall for universities, our enrollment has increased. So I think in some ways this map may reflect that we have had some changes in enrollment statewide at community colleges, whereas at universities we have seen a steady increase over time, and especially the last couple of years, which is, I think, what this reflects since 2011. Is that correct? Yes.
That's a very important point, because we often forget that community colleges play a critical role in terms of workforce development even once people have been in the workforce. So you have a large number of students who come back for retraining. They may come back for simply one course to learn a particular skill. And as the economy is doing extraordinarily well, you lose many of those students. And so the large increases 7, 8 years ago was because, in fact, the economy overall wasn't doing that well, and so you had a lot of people retraining. We even saw some of that at the universities where people had left for the tech industry. I've been hired out by, when they were juniors, were having to return to finish their degrees, because often the people in, say, IT that lost their jobs first were the ones who hadn't finished their degree. And so, but now we're at a much better place, and I think that we will see some recovery in the community colleges, because people always need to have retraining. We do have more people going from high schools to community colleges initially than they did before. We did mention that there's been a slight decrease in high school directly to college enrollment. I think, about 1 percentage point, but not much more than that.
Yeah,
it wasn't quite that much, we say. So, but we're trying to get that up about 3 points to about 60% as we go forward in our higher ed plan.
Dora?
Excellent report. Something that we can use and work with, and a lot of good information that we can take with us and work in our particular areas. Commissioner, I want to echo the concern about our high school grads. Obviously, if they're not graduating from high school, we're not going to get them into the colleges. I attended a ribbon cutting for Southwest Texas Junior College a couple of days ago, and I was so encouraged by the fact that we are doing so much better in our area in graduating high school students. It's still a long way. When you enroll 900 freshman students and graduate 500, it's a big gap there. But I was encouraged by the fact that it was noted that 400 of those students were enrolled in dual courses. They were already taking classes at the junior college. So obviously that academic counseling is working, and I think that academic counseling is really the key. If you have good counseling at your high schools, because a lot of those students, if they come from families like I did, my mom and dad went to second and third grade, but they were great believers in education. They were going to make sure that, as my dad said, you got to have el papelito, you got to have your diploma, and they said graduate from high school. That was the key then. And nowadays in our area, all along the border, South Texas, you have a lot of families that are just coming from other countries and even from Mexico that need a lot of academic counseling. So I think that really is the key. But excellent report. Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other comments?
Do we approve this or accept it?
Apparently so. So I need a motion to accept need a second. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you very much. Ginger Julie, thank you. Appreciate the report. Great job. Agenda item 5B is consideration of adopting the staff recommendation to the committee relating to authorizing the board chair, vice chair, and chair of the committee to approve on behalf of the board the report on financial assistance for students enrolled at Western Governors University or similar online colleges and universities, including legislative recommendations for creating a state-funded student financial assistance program for students attending those institutions consistent with Section 4 of Senate Bill 215, 83rd Texas Legislature regular session. Supplementary material for this item is provided for you under the yellow color. Jane Caldwell, Director of Grants and Special Programs, will provide the committee with an overview of the process and report. Jane, thank you for being here.
Thank you, sir. It's a pleasure to be here. Good morning. My name is Jane Caldwell, and I'm here to talk about a project that we undertook as a result of a directive in Senate Bill 215, which was for the coordinating board to conduct a study dealing with the world of competency-based education, or innovative types of education, and to draft legislation for a financial aid program and for a certain set of institutions. And once you read through the many adjectives that are in the description in the statute, that came to be the Western Governors University, Texas. One moment, please. In running or conducting this study, we were pleased to work with a number of stakeholders, the members of our Student Financial Aid Advisory Committee, members of the staff of WGU Texas, and also their Salt Lake City office, and then public and private institutions that have that are beginning to move in that direction, experiment some with more innovative types of delivery of education, and we're interested in the discussion. WGU is a unique type of institution if you come from the traditional world of education in Texas. It is a private nonprofit institution. The average age of the student is 37. We're not talking about students who are coming fresh out of high school and going on into college. WGU offers exclusively online, competency-based education. They have new terms beginning at the each month. So a student who doesn't enroll in September can enroll in October, and this continues throughout the year. Students learn at a variable pace. They are encouraged to take enroll in what they call competency units that are designed to move them through the body of knowledge that they need to have in order to have mastery and acquire a degree. But they can go through those courses at their own pace, though with the help and consultation with the WGU staff as to the sequencing of their courses and so forth. The education is provided at a fixed tuition rate, so students who wish to take more courses are encouraged to do so by that type of pricing, but again with guidance as to what they're biting off and getting into. WGU does not use grades. In order to pass a competency, you are given a test you have to perform, you need to show that you have acquired mastery over at least 80% of the materials that are involved in that competency in order to get credit for it. And then the learning resources, because this is an online operation, are available to the students every day for 24 hours. In order to have the study conducted, the coordinating board contracted with Dr. Sandy Baum, a research professor of education policy at the George Washington University. Dr. Baum conducted the study by interacting with the individuals in the state and who are involved in this type of education. And her study takes a broader view of the topic than was required by Senate Bill 215. She gives some information about the world of these innovative courses and the fact that our current financial aid programs, by their structure, do not lend themselves very well to this new world of students enrolling each semester or each month and so forth. Among the issues that were raised, as I mentioned, is that the current programs, such as the Texas Grant, TEOG, and TEG, really are not suited for this kind of environment. They look for the completion of X numbers of semester credit hours or completion of X percent of the courses that you take, a certain grade point average in order to continue. So in looking at this program or this environment, we needed to take a look at some different approaches. In designing the legislation, obviously, the first thing you need to do is identify who can qualify to receive a grant. And the state of Texas in general requires recipients of state aid to be classified as Texas residents. And we included that in this description or in the draft legislation. They have to be enrolled in a baccalaureate degree. WGU Texas only offers baccalaureate degree or master degree level instruction, although they do have some certificates for teachers who have acquired their bachelor's degrees. The student has to show financial need. We are interested in helping students who need assistance to go to college. And in fact, the statute requires the program to give main attention to those students with the greatest financial need. And one of our ways of identifying needy students is by looking at their expected family contribution, which is a measure of the discretionary resources in their family for higher education, as calculated using the federal methodology. Once you get into the program, though, we're interested in you making progress towards your degree, and so one of the requirements for receiving a continuation award is that you complete at least 15 competency units in the previous term. Now, terms at WGU Texas are 6 months long. A student who fails to meet this requirement in a given term doesn't lose permanent eligibility for the program, but they would have to complete a semester or a term and meet this requirement before they would be able to receive an award in a subsequent term. And the eligibility for the award is limited in our statute, our proposed statute, to when the student receives a baccalaureate degree, the 4th anniversary of their first award if they came to the institution with fewer than 60, the equivalent of 60 credit hours or 60 competency units, or if they came with the equivalent, what we would consider typically of an associate's degree, they have 2 years of eligibility in the program. The report that we have provided to you and the draft legislation has to go to the legislature by October 1st. And so we have, staff is recommending that the committee authorize its chair and the vice chair and chair of the board to approve on behalf of the board the study and legislative recommendations so that we can forward the report to the legislature. If you have any questions, I would be glad to address them.
David?
Not that I disagree with it, but the generally accepted federal and I thought our state period of time that we measure degree completion was 6 years for bachelor's degrees. We're only allowing a 5-year eligibility and a 2.5-year eligibility for the associates. Can you tell me why?
Yes, sir. In the Texas grant program, you can have 5 years for a 4-year degree and 6 years if you're in a degree of more than 4 years. But to address your real question is that the expectation of students enrolled at WGU Texas is that they will move, that they are self-paced, that they are highly motivated. These, again, are adult students, not children coming out of high school, and they are motivated to move forward. And we want the grant program to encourage that as well.
How do we get our younger students coming right out of high school motivated like that?
Same thing, yeah.
Very good question.
I'm sorry, but I really believe that, 8 semesters is enough to complete a bachelor's degree, and that's only 4 years. And it's not your issue here. The other question I would have is, why do we need to authorize the chair, vice chair, and committee chair? It looks like you have draft legislation here. Why don't we just adopt this and send this over?
That is an excellent question. It was my understanding that was the procedure to follow, but I defer to those who are here.
It is. I just wanted to mention that I've gotten, I think Linda knows, but it's 3.5 or just under 4 years is the average time to graduate from WGU. And initially, this first period, the first 6 months, many of the students complete far more competencies than you would think. When Linda and I talked with the chancellor of WGU from out of state a number of years ago, he told us that very often people from the IT industry in particular completed many, many competencies in that first 6 months. And in fact, some of them knew things that some of their instructors didn't know because they'd had 10, 15 years in the industry already. And it's when they got to another level that the pace slowed down when they got into new areas, the real reason for them to get to the degree. So initially, you're taking a very experienced student body, typically, and who have a great deal of work experience. And all of their programs are workforce oriented. I've forgotten the full range, but they have nursing, they have IT, business degrees, and teacher education, I think, is pretty much all they offer. So they're very focused.
The chancellor's here today if you have any questions. So she's back here.
Chancellor, why don't you come on up?
Well, thank you.
While she's coming up, I just wanted to explain very quickly.
Procedural.
We obviously looked at WGU and the average time for completion for their students. And according to their information, the average time for completion for a student who comes already with an associate's degree is approximately 3.5 years. So that's why we put the 4-year anniversary mark for those who come in.
It was 2 to 2.5 years if you had an associate's degree.
Thank you.
And 4 years if you did not. So that's in sync with
Yes.
what we did in our draft legislation.
Is this program more designed for those that are already out there in the workforce, but never, for whatever reason, never attained a bachelor's degree?
That's
the
correct.
focus?
The typical student, as Jane mentioned, is 37. They typically have some college credits but don't have a degree. So when we're looking at sort of statistically who our student body is, they're adult learners, they work full time, in many instances they're also supporting a family, and they started college but didn't finish. And so this offers them that opportunity to go back, complete their degree in a way that allows them to not quit their jobs, and is not a hardship to their families.
So if someone is working full-time and is still taking 15 hours, they're having to put quite a bit of effort in it to get it done.
Yes, and as I was having this conversation before the meeting this morning, it's a rigorous program, and so we don't want to represent this as an easy route for students. It is a rigorous academic program, but it allows them to complete their degree without having to be at a classroom at a certain time. And as you know, if you're working shifts, if you've got a job, if you've got kids to shuttle around, that can present an insurmountable obstacle for many students.
What's the cost?
The cost is a little under $3,000 per term. So it's a little under $6,000 per year, most of our programs, and it's flat rate. So many of our students, as someone mentioned, the IT program, for example, if they know a lot, they want to get through as many as they can in a short amount of time, and that accelerates their time to completion, and it also increases the affordability of the program.
Two quick questions. What's the student population? And do you have any young folks straight out of high school going through this program? I mean, if the average is 37, I'm sure we have some, and what's their success look like?
Our current student population, as of last month, was 5,200 students in Texas. Nationwide, it's about 50,000, but WGU Texas is 5,200. We are not seeing too many students. I would look and see if we have any currently who are straight out of high school. We could look and see if we have any, but typically we do not.
And is that because, well, why is that? I mean...
Well, in particular, because when we're doing our enrollment counseling and looking at college readiness, an easy indicator is if they've completed some college courses. So I think that's part of it. In addition, because of the model, we're fairly new here, and we tend to market to adult learners. And because we're not offering some of those things, many college students are looking for. If you're 18 years old, you may want that kind of residential college life, and we don't offer that.
You might want to mention something about the agreement you entered into with the public community colleges 2 or 3 years ago.
Yes, so we entered into an agreement with the community college organization throughout the state, and we also enter into articulation agreements and guaranteed pathways agreements with individual community colleges so that we create incentives for their students, their graduates, to complete their associate's degree and go on to complete their bachelor's degree. And as was previously mentioned, the success rate of those students is quite high with us. They've proven that they can get that associate's degree and do college work, and then they can complete that bachelor's degree while they're working their jobs that maybe their associate's degree enabled them to get, and this is a way for them to complete that baccalaureate degree.
So I see this as the last mile to finish, which is usually the most difficult mile to finish. So what is the success rate? Because if they are coming in to really finish and move forward with the life, and they are mature enough, like you suggested, and they are definitely motivated. So what would be the rate of success?
I'd have to look up our graduation rates because we mark them at different years, and so I can get back to the committee on that. Our persistence rates are very high, and our graduation rates are higher than other online institutions, and I could get you those rates as well.
Are they over more than 80%?
I don't know the answer to that. I'm sorry.
Okay, thanks.
Janelle?
Well, I was really curious about competency-based education last year, and so went online and was looking at WGU and realized maybe I should just enroll.
Sure.
So I finished a course, and I want you to know that I really think this is the future of education. This is such a great answer for what we're looking for our RN to BSN program, all the graduate degrees that they offer, but I found the coursework very, very rigorous, engaging, but the way they present it, they keep you in the class. They keep you moving forward. And I'll just, we talk about Phoenix and how they've kind of owned online stuff for a long time, but this is better. This is a lot better than what Phoenix offers, and we've got to take away all those Texans that are in those programs and put them back in this, because this is so much better, and it's a better use of our dollars. I have to apologize. I didn't realize we didn't have student support, or financial support for WGU when I enrolled. My employer actually paid for it, gladly paid for it. So it was just, it was a great experience, and I actually emailed the chancellor and told her I was kind of the covert student, but I really enjoyed all of my coursework and my degree. So
well, thank you.
Well, thank you for doing that. And secondly, you did get the 80% competency, didn't you? Yes.
Barely a B.
Commissioner?
I just wanted to emphasize that this study is a very important part of a larger issue and a larger picture. We've done a number of studies both internally, and NCHEMS, the National Center for Higher Education Management Systems, has done some studies. We cannot reach our very ambitious goals that we're looking at for 2030 simply by enrolling students straight out of high school. We have to go back and recover a good percentage of those students who started college either in a conventional environment or an unconventional one, and get them to finish their credentials. And so Western Governors University is a very important part of our strategy. And I agree that of all the institutions that have adopted unconventional approaches to offering degrees, Western Governors University is absolutely one of the most innovative and one of the strongest. So we look forward to working very closely with you.
Just on that point, I would like to remind the board that they adopted a program called Grad Techs a few years ago, specifically to address students who had enrolled in many courses and hadn't finished. And we have a number of public universities involved in that, but WGU is one of the institutions that's set up. If you go to the website, students can contact WGU and a number of publics who are prepared to actually take them from where they are through the completion of their degree. And it's very important because we literally have thousands of students, that's really understating it, who have invested a significant amount of their money taking courses, but they haven't finished degrees, and the state has invested hundreds of millions of dollars in them. So this is a way to help them get through that. So we have public universities actively doing that. We have WGU actively doing that. So it is a key part of our strategy, as the Commissioner mentioned.
Dora?
Chairman? All I can say is, where were you 40 years ago? I was a non-traditional student. I did not start college until I was married, had 3 children, and had a full-time job. Sometimes I had to travel 70 miles to go to Southwest Texas Junior College to take some of my courses that required lab work. And of course, in those years, tuition was affordable. But today, it would have been heaven for me. So I think this is excellent.
Thank you.
Jacob?
Chancellor, I noticed that, some advertisements, which is good because, we got to get that message to the people. The proprietary schools do a good job of targeting people on the internet, and can you describe what you're doing to get the message of Western Governors University out to the masses?
Yes, and that's our challenge. As a nonprofit, we don't have the marketing budget that some of our for-profit peers do, but we are making every effort. And so we do have marketing going on, and particularly in large cities, Houston and Dallas, where we do a lot of social media. A number of our students come from, if they're online, that's a good place to start. So we look for them there. The bulk of my time is often spent meeting with employers to see if we can enter into partnership agreements with them to offer their employees a discount to attend WGU Texas, and to send materials to their employees and make it available on job sites so that we can reach working students that way as well. We look for opportunities to partner with other nonprofits, to use grant opportunities to reach as broad an audience as possible. Starting an El Paso initiative. I think El Paso is ripe for workforce development initiatives and education initiatives, and so I think that's an important piece of this as well. We're working with the Greater Texas Foundation to reach rural students. So we're doing everything we can. It is a challenge for us. Texas is not our smallest state that we're in, but we are very serious about it, and I'm very committed to it.
What is the, you have 5,200 students now. What is the capacity?
Well, the capacity, because we're not a brick and mortar, we don't have to worry about classroom size or dorms or any of those facilities that might be limiters. It's not unlimited because we want to maintain quality. For every 20 students, we might add an additional staffer. What I like to convey to people is this is a highly personalized educational experience. If you've taken an online driver's ed course, this is not that. This is about having a rigorous academic program and having an assigned counselor, an assigned faculty mentor who keeps you through, who contacts you at least once a week, make sure you're on progress. You have course mentors who are experts in the field who can lead you through challenging content. So we do add staffing and faculty as we add students, but our capacity, we believe, could be 10 or 15,000 students within the state of Texas or more.
And you're taking advantage of people that the state may already have a tremendous investment in that just hasn't finished their degree.
Yes. We have a number of students who come to us with a lot of debt. So we have scholarships available to help students who have maxed out, who've taken on too much debt, who may have been attending another institution that's gone bankrupt. We've seen a number of challenges in that space as well. And so we have financial aid opportunities for those students to really encourage them, go back, finish that degree. Do not continue with saddled with debt and no degree.
So back to Dr. Tescher's question. Is there anything else that needs to be done? Is the report still in progress and hasn't been finalized yet?
Well, and I'll address that. The reason why we had the caption or the motion the way that it is because typically these reports that are going on to the legislature are adopted by the full board. And because of the deadline of October 1, short of calling a special called meeting of the full board to adopt this report, we just asked the committee to authorize the board chair, vice chair, and the chair of the committee to adopt the final report. We also were in anticipation of potential changes to the report. At this meeting, if there were public testimony, we were anticipating perhaps there were some stakeholders who had expressed initially some concern with the fact that the legislation was focused on WGU Texas or similar institutions. I think they would have liked to have seen the recommendation go and include the private, the ICUT institutions to participate in this program. And our reading of the legislation is that it's for WGU or similar institutions, and right now there are no other similar institutions operating like WGU in Texas.
Yeah, so understanding the timing and the need to forward this, and also understanding that there was not public testimony and that is staff's reading of the legislation, it seems to me we have something in a form that we as a committee could forward on to the legislature and without necessarily having to have the chair. So I'm seeing a quorum of the board here, and I guess my question to Bill would be, can I make a motion that the committee forward this to the legislature? And I'm seeing a yes, and so I will make that motion rather than empowering the chair, vice chair, and chair of the committee, who happens to be the same person as the vice chair. I would move that this committee forward this to the legislature.
Second. I have a motion and a second. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Great. Thank you, David. Great. Thank you, Jane, very much. Chancellor, thank you for being here. Appreciate it.
Mr. Chairman, could I ask something real quick? Sorry. Chancellor?
Chancellor Sedgwick.
I really like hearing everything about your program. I would say one thing, if you are going to expand, something you might want to look at is trying to get people who haven't completed high school, possibly going into online education to help students who haven't gotten their GED but are still working. That could be great for you as far as if they complete their high school, then they're likely to go on and complete with you as well their associates or bachelors. So I know you like to use college or the percentage of how much of their college they've completed as an assessment tool to figure out if they can complete your course. But if you are looking to expand, a third of our 8th graders aren't going to make it through high school. So that could be one area for expansion if you want to entertain that idea.
Thanks. All right, agenda item 5C is consideration of adopting the staff recommendation of the committee relating to the Higher Education Fund study required by Texas Education Code, Chapter 62, Subchapter B, Section 62.022. Gary Johnston, Deputy Assistant Commissioner Planning and Accountability, will give a presentation. Gary, thank you.
Thank you. I'm Gary Johnstone, Deputy Assistant Commissioner. I believe you received a copy of the draft report. I'll try to be brief on the presentation. The Higher Education Fund was created in 1985 as part of the Excellence in Higher Education Act, and it's designed to assist the institutions that at that time were not able to participate in the Permanent University Fund or the bonds issued against the Public and Permanent University Fund. There will be 30 institutions receiving funds this in 2016, which is this for the recommendation. 3 health science centers, 3 two-year state colleges, 23 universities, and the TSTC system. Per the Constitution, these funds are only to be used for education and general purposes that are outlined on the slide. Wrong way. In 2016, there will be some changes in the eligible institutions. 2 institutions that will be added and 2 institutions that will be removed. The 2 institutions that are removed are because they are going to be consolidated into a new institution that is created by the UT system, which makes them ineligible. Any institution such as the new ones that we've added in Central Texas with Texas A&M and San Antonio, Texas A&M, they were created by the system, A&M system, so they will not be eligible to participate in the Higher Education Fund. They are participating in the Permanent University Fund. The Coordinating Board is required by statute to conduct this study every 10 years, and the scope of the study is outlined in statute. In July of this year, the Commissioner invited all eligible institutions to appoint a representative to conduct this study, to participate in the study, and also we invited the LBB and the Governor's Office to have a representative. I want to thank all the participants. We had full participation in the study of all the eligible institutions. The objectives of the study were a couple of items that we were required to do, and then this one that we were not required by statute to do, but the participants wanted to include, is to determine if the existing amount of appropriations was adequate to meet the needs of the institutions. By statute, we were also required to review the current allocation formula and the metrics that were used in the allocation formula. Another requirement of the study by statute is to identify what is the impact on deferred maintenance for the use of these funds. What we found in our study, looking at the available data between 2004 and 2012, is that there has not been a dramatic impact on deferred maintenance at the institutions with these funds. Even though 54% of the funds that were used to address deferred maintenance came from this fund. The lowest level of deferred maintenance in this period was in 2008, and the highest is in 2012. The details on that on those figures are in the report on page 10. The current allocation formula, when we looked at it, in 2008, we did the required 5-year review of the allocation formula, and at that time, the recommendation that was adopted by the legislature is that complexity would be 50% of the allocation, and the remaining 50% would be split between facility condition and space deficit. And the percentage was 27 space deficit, 23 facility condition. We measure complexity by the formula funding that is allocated to the institutions. As you know, the formula funding is cost-based, so in institutions that have more graduate or upper-level programs, the rate on those hours is higher than the lower division. So the legislature agreed that we could use formula funding as a metric for measuring complexity. The recommended changes that out of the study and the input from the participants is, the first one is to fix the allocation between space deficit and facility condition at 25%, making up the 50 that's not allocated by complexity. What happened in how we had calculated this before was that we would use the rate per square foot, the current rate of construction per square foot of classroom space, as a metric for determining the value of the space deficit. And in the last 10 years, that value has doubled. We went from $208 a square foot to $406 a square foot. So in doing that, we shifted a lot of funds. The percentage went from 27% to 37% for space deficit, and only left 13% of the funds used for facility condition. So the recommendation of the participants is that we fix it even at 25% each. We also, as I said, looked at the appropriation amount, and as you see, every year, every time that we've had a 10-year review, the legislature has seen to increase the amount allocated annually. It's gone from $100 million, which is what it was adopted and inputted in 1985, to the current level of $262 million. The recommendation of the study and the participants is to increase it by 50% to a total of $393 million for the upcoming 10-year period. We used several things to justify this. One is that the enrollment has significantly increased at the eligible institutions in this fund. Also, the value of, as we talked about, the cost of maintaining facilities and building facilities has increased considerably during this time. And since this is only reviewed every 5 years by statute, we use some trend to forecast what the growth of enrollment would be in the next 5 to 10 years. That concludes my presentation. Are there any questions?
David. So the two institutions that are going to be removed are consolidating. Will the new consolidated institution be included or added?
No, it's because it was the UT Pan American, UT Brownsville were consolidated into Rio Grande, and that was an institution created by the UT system. They are eligible now for the permanent university bond proceeds and debt service by the permanent university fund, and they will not be participating in the higher education fund.
Thank you.
All the institutions participate in one or the other, except for the community colleges.
Move approval.
Any other discussion? All in favor of the motion, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, same side. Great. Motion carries. Gary, thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right, agenda item 5D is an update on the Texas Workforce Planning Study addressing the state's projected workforce needs for training and education. House Bill 1296, 83rd Texas Legislature regular session. Charles Goldman from the RAND Corporation will provide the update. Charles, welcome back. Good to see you again.
Thank you very much. It's my pleasure to be here. Before I start, I also want to give you one small update. I just recently returned from Sydney, Australia, where I was invited to speak on the topic of the blurring boundaries between workforce education and higher education. And I used the study that you all sponsored on the community college baccalaureates and distributed copies and links to that study to the 400 attendees of the conference in Australia. Spreading the word.
I look forward to being invited to Sydney.
I'm available.
One of my favorite cities, by the way.
It was a wonderful opportunity. So today,
yeah.
Maybe you need it a little closer. Better? As promised, I'm here to give you an update on the second of the workforce-related studies. And so this study, it focuses on how the state and institutions use information about the workforce to plan degree programs. And there are two broad ways that we use workforce information. So institutions all the time are using information about the workforce to understand what programs they might want to propose and to develop those program proposals, which in some cases come to the coordinating board for review. There's also a need to do periodic strategic review and priority setting. Ginger's presentation on the regional plan is an example of how information about the workforce is used to identify priorities that the state as a whole or particular regions ought to address. So I want to walk you through the objectives and the approach of the study. We'll talk about what data is available, how it's used in Texas, how it's used in other states, how it's used by institutions. We've developed some new tools in the course of the project that we're proposing to be adopted. And I'll end the presentation with some recommendations and then update you on where we're going from here. The objectives of the study, and as you think you know, this was mandated by House Bill 1296, and the final report of the study is due to the legislature February 1st next year. So first objective is to describe the current practices, analyze the options for using this information, and recommend what we would call promising practices, develop new data tools where feasible, and to apply the tools and describe those findings. And you received a draft report, I think, in your read-ahead packet for the meeting. We did quite a lot of quantitative analysis of data sources, and I'll talk briefly in the presentation about what we did. There's considerably more detail in the draft report. We also talked to coordinating board staff and some other state officials. We coordinated very closely with the Texas Workforce Commission on this entire study, and they were great partners. We also did an online review of practices and tools available in the other 49 states in the U.S. And we spoke with a sample of 7 colleges and universities to talk to them about their institution level practices, and we reviewed 20 program proposals that had been submitted over the last couple of years to the coordinating board. We also talked to some providers of paid services. The there are many data sources available about the workforce. One of the most important comes from the Texas Workforce Commission, which operates under guidance from the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics, and they produce 10-year forecasts. They produce estimates of the number of workers employed, or number of positions in various occupations, and the projected 10-year demand for those occupations. The U.S. Census Bureau runs the American Community Survey, which is a relatively new data source. It's been in existence for less than 10 years. It replaced the long form of the decennial census. So there's no longer a short form and a long form. The American Community Survey replaced that. The coordinating board, as I'm sure you well know, compiles statistics on the completions of degrees and certificates, among many other aspects of the higher ed system. There's an increasing trend to looking at analysis of online job postings. And you can imagine with the millions of online job postings, it's a somewhat complicated affair to distill that down into usable information. And so that is commonly done by subscribing to paid commercial services. And I'll talk a little bit about that. And finally, it's very important to have discussions with employers and other experts on the labor market. As a big theme of the report and the presentation is statistical data can be informative, but it never will tell you the whole story. You will always have to have contact with people who are managing the workforce directly, whether employers or professional bodies, to understand the needs. I'm going to talk a little bit about modeling because it's important to understand some of what we're going to recommend. And I'm going to introduce two broad types of models. We'll call a stock model and a flow model, and then maybe fancy words. What it means, a stock is we count up the total number, for instance, of workers in a certain occupation. Whereas a flow is looking at changes over time. So a flow would be the annual number of hires in that occupation. So let's look at the flow model. And the flow model turns out to be the one that underlies the most common uses of workforce data. So the typical flow model goes something like this. You project the annual demand for a certain occupation. So how many are we going to need? You link the occupation to degree programs. You say, well, how many are we going to produce every year in those degree programs? And then you compare those quantities. And if one is higher than the other, then you might say there is a gap or a surplus. There are two really significant challenges, or I would even say weaknesses, with this approach. And I'm going to talk about both of them. One is there are many other ways to fill positions other than just graduating new graduates into the market. People move from all over the country into Texas, or if we're doing this regionally, they move across the state. And finally, there are fields, many fields, in which it's quite difficult to draw direct linkages from an occupation to a particular degree program. So then you really don't know what you should be counting. I'm going to talk about that. So the stock model is much less commonly used, but it would go something like this. Rather than looking at the annual flow or changes, you would look at the total number of workers that employers demand in an occupation. You would compare that to the total estimated supply of workers in that occupation. And that would give you a direct estimate of whether there's a gap or a surplus at the occupational level. Now, you still have to link those occupations to degree programs. You've still got that same challenge. And then finally compare what the capacity of the post-secondary institutions is to meet that need. I'm going to talk about these both a little bit more. Now, as it turns out, what we found in our research is that although the logic of the flow model often underlies how people use this data, it's very uncommon to do explicit modeling to address degree planning. So it's very uncommon to find either institutions or even states doing an actual formal model. What they typically do instead is they interpret indicators. So for instance, wage changes are often used. So if wages are rising in a certain occupation, that's often interpreted as a potential shortage, that employers are raising the wages they're offering because they can't find enough people. Or with the online job postings and some other data, you can sometimes get data on vacancy rates. You can also get information on how frequently employers are posting job postings. And all those could be indications that we might have a shortage in a certain area. So Ginger told you that the coordinating board uses 10 regions, and in the data analysis for this study, we're following those 10 regions. As I mentioned, linking the occupations to the degrees is a challenge. There is a federal government-sponsored crosswalk, which is called the SIP-SOC crosswalk. SIP is the classification of instructional programs, which you may be familiar with, and SOC is the standard occupational code. So those are the taxonomies for describing degree programs and occupations. And the Department of Education, BLS, publishes this crosswalk. But the crosswalk only shows direct linkages. So there has to be a really close linkage for it to show up. What's interesting is, as I said, a little less than 10 years ago, the U.S. Census started the American Community Survey, which is a large-scale probability sample of the U.S. population and allows us to observe the actual distribution of fields of degree for bachelor's holders in Texas and in every other state by occupation. Doesn't actually allow us to observe field for any other degree level. So not for certificates or associates and not for graduate degrees. But at least for bachelor's degrees, we have this data source. And what I'll show you is, some fields do have quite a direct linkage. Nursing's a good example. Other fields have a very diffuse linkage. Computer science fields are a good example. So if we look, this is some data from the American Community Survey. If we look at registered nurses in Texas, which is an occupation, we see that the majority hold a bachelor's degree or a graduate degree, so BS or higher. If we look at the field of degree for those who hold a bachelor's degree or higher, 81% of the bachelor's holders earned a bachelor's of science in nursing. So there's a pretty direct linkage. Now let's look at computer science. So I have pulled out, you can imagine this SIP-SOC crosswalk is quite a complicated document. So what I've done here is I've presented a graphical image just selecting out 7 occupations related to computer science and a list of degree fields that are related. And so the green blocks indicate where the SIP-SOC crosswalk has a match between degrees and occupations. Now let's look at the data. So it turns out, I'm going to focus on computer systems analysts. That's an interesting field. Turns out the majority of computer systems analysts in Texas hold a bachelor's or a graduate degree. Now, if we look at the field of degree, remember when I showed you the nursing list, it was very concentrated in one field. Here's the list for computer systems analysts. And I've actually, to make this readable for you, I've cut this off at the fields that account for 2% or more. We have, in the tools we've prepared, we can go all the way down, and there are dozens of fields that contribute. The yellow highlights that you see on the screen, 2 of them, those are the only 2 entries that appear in the SIP-SOC crosswalk. So if I were using the SIP-SOC crosswalk to say, how do I fill a possible shortage in computer systems analyst, it would tell me, well, I need these 2 instructional programs. Those instructional programs empirically account for just 9% of the workers who are actually in this occupation. So most researchers will say that the SIP-SOC crosswalk can be useful at certificate and very applied associate's degrees where you expect a tight linkage from the educational program into the occupation. Becomes much less useful when you get to bachelor's degrees in many fields where there is a lot of mixing. And so that's going to be a big challenge. And if you think about doing flow modeling, this chart is a big negative for trying to do that. Okay, so let's look at what people are actually doing. So we'll start with the states. The coordinating board gets program proposals, and the staff validate the institutional submission by checking the data. So the coordinating board staff are actually going back to the data sources, checking what the institutions have submitted, maybe checking other sources. Coordinating board also produces the regional plan that Ginger just presented to you, and that's a key document that's produced every 2 years. And there are regions, so going below the state level, there are regions that also offer more specific analyses. So in both in the Gulf Coast region and in the Metroplex, there are regional bodies that have prepared more detailed analyses. But most of these regions don't have a planning process. And even the coordinating board's regional report, which we think is a great report, doesn't necessarily connect with a specific planning process. So you all putting this data out, and then it's really up to the institutions to use it. Let's look at other states. So we didn't have the resources in the study to do interviews with all the other states. So what we decided to do was we did a systematic web look at what states have on their websites in terms of data systems for labor market information, for crosswalks, and for more analytic reports. And so what we found is virtually every state, 46 out of 50 states, has a tool on a website where users can get labor market information. And Texas has quite a number of these tools the Texas Workforce Commission provides. So this is almost universally available. Only 14 states attempt to link that kind of data directly to degree programs. And all but one of those 14 just use the federal SIP to SOC crosswalk to do it. We only found one state that's really gone beyond the SIP to SOC crosswalk. That's the state of Connecticut, where they've actually done analysis to cluster degree fields and occupations into broader groups that you can draw linkages between. And finally, we found only 11 states that had published recent reports that attempt to link workforce data to actual needs for degree programs. So only about a fifth of the states we found are actually trying to go to the degree planning level. We talked to some of the institutions, and we found quite a bit of variation in the ones we talked to. Some of the institutions have highly formal processes for examining the data and developing degree plan programs, and others have very informal processes. It's quite common for new proposed degrees to arise in a very bottom-up way. A department head or a faculty member may have a conversation with the employer. We have this need. It's not being met. And now all of a sudden, there's a proposal. We found relatively fewer of the institutions we talked to did systematic scanning of their region and their labor market to try to identify unmet gaps. The institutions use the TWC and BLS data extensively. Many of them also use these commercial providers to access information about job postings and also to use public sources of data in an easier way. Institutions almost universally told us they talked to employers. One of the things the institutions also brought up is they said it's very important for them to understand not just a potential need, but also the other potential sources of supply to fill that need. And in particular, the capacity of other institutions in their service area who might have to serve that need. Because they said, well, we don't really want to start a program. If there's an existing program and they have excess capacity, be easier for them to expand to serve that need. And the institutions said it's very difficult to get systematic information about that capacity. They call each other and so forth. So the institutions suggested a number of ways to improve planning. They said that there is a lot of data available, but it could be easier to access and use. They would like more systematic information on capacity. And one of the issues that came up in discussion of capacities, institutions said the definition and the degree plan varies from institution to institution within the same field, and that complicates this matching up of supply and demand because it's harder to know, is that other program really addressing the same demand? So some people suggested that there might be a role for more standardization. And I know that you have sponsored the tuning process in a number of fields that's been addressing that. Institutions also want more current data. It takes about 2 to 3 years for these large-scale public data sources to become available. And finally, I just want to mention that Ray Marshall Center conducted a survey, and their top finding was that virtually everybody wanted a direct comparison of labor demand and labor supply in their region. So we're trying to address exactly that need. I'm going to put the flow and stock models up briefly again now with a whole bunch of bullet points about what data can be used. And I'm going to highlight in red what we're trying to add in this project. So we're going to give some tools to show the fields of degree to help improve this linkage from occupations to degrees. And in particular, you notice in the stock model, I talked about that the second block, which is looking at the total supply of workers, this actually was almost impossible to do at the occupation level until the ACS, the American Community Survey, was implemented. So it's now feasible to do something like this, and that's exactly what we're proposing to do. So what we're proposing to do is to take the published TWC data on occupational demand, to calculate supply using the American Community Survey in the same occupations, and to compare the growth rates for demand and the growth rates for supply. Now, it turns out you cannot directly compare these data because the way they're calculated is completely different. So they cannot be compared directly to each other. And so what we've come up with is, instead of doing that, we've categorized all the occupations. We actually grouped them to make this more feasible into low, medium, and high demand growth. And we've done the same thing on the supply side, look at low, medium, and high supply growth. And so then that gives us this 3x3 matrix. So you can see, and what you'd be concerned about is, if you look at the diagonal, it turns out most of the groups sit on the diagonal. So they're either low growth in demand, low growth in supply, or medium, medium, or high, high. But you've got some that are off the diagonal. In particular, you worry about this lower region below the diagonal where you have a projected high demand and you have only low or maybe medium supply growth. And so I'll show you the full tables in the paper, but I'll show you the occupational groups that we found in this area of concern where projected demand growth is high, but the supply growth has been only low or medium. And you can see a number of science-related occupation fields: life, physical, computer science, social science. You can also see a number of other fields. We're restricting this analysis only to occupations that have a post-secondary need, and that's about roughly 60% of the labor force. Doesn't mean necessarily that everybody in those occupations has post-secondary education, but those are the ones that we judge have a need. And so what we're recommending is, statistical data is certainly useful. It's already being very widely used. It's not sufficient for making decisions, and I think everybody involved understands that. So it's very important to combine the insights from statistical data with qualitative discussions. And even then, this is still a very imperfect art. We are recommending that tools like the matrix that I showed you potentially be added to the biennial regional report. We are preparing those at the regional level, the 10 regions, so that can be a guide to start planning conversations in those regions. The other thing which we ought to think about is there's a lot of need to talk to employers. It's relatively difficult. I think maybe surprisingly difficult. It's actually hard to engage employers, and it's hard to get usable information from them. And I have to tell you, I'm not exactly sure what to suggest, but I think there may be a role for a more routine and systematic process of employer engagement that wouldn't rely only on these individual linkages between institutions and employers. And that potentially could be done regionally. For the institutions, we think that there's an opportunity to spread good practices. We talked to a couple of institutions that have formal, documented, step-by-step processes for analyzing and preparing degree programs. Might be a good idea to share those. Furthermore, there is a need for information that's more current, especially for community college programs which want to respond to rapidly emerging needs. This is really the domain of commercial services at the moment, so it may be something to think about how to use those more efficiently, or maybe periodically to do reports on emerging industries and the occupations that they demand. And finally, maybe think about a capacity reporting tool that institutions could provide some information. So instead of having to call each other every time they want to know, what do you offer? Do you have space? Maybe have some kind of common tool that institutions could all access that would potentially save them some work. So where we're going from here, we're going to release the draft report as well as drafts of the tools for public comment and for peer review. I plan to return to you at your December meeting. I'll give you an update on the public comment. I'll let you know any changes that we've made. And then the report will, assuming you forward it to the full board, would then be approved by the full board and submitted to the legislature by the February 1st deadline.
Any questions? Janelle.
So, Mr. Goldman, could the coordinating board be the clearinghouse for that kind of dissemination of information? So my competitor in the community might be developing a program, and I don't know the capacity, but the coordinating board would perhaps know that information.
And we could be that kind of linkage point. Already, when a new program is going to be developed, they have to notify all of the institutions within their area so that they can comment on it, and they can say, we already have that program, why are you developing it? Or they can say, yes, can we do a linkage where we can send some of our students who are interested in that program over to you. We've had that happen also.
So maybe we just don't have a formal process.
We don't have a formal process
needs to
for
be
capacity.
Right. Okay, thank you. Great report. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Also had a question on, you were talking about the difficulty of engaging the employers, which just seems kind of surprising to me. And maybe it's just that there's not a structure within which to do that. I mean, are we thinking about how do we overcome that?
Yeah, I mean, we've been thinking about it. And in fact, we faced this challenge in the community college baccalaureate study ourselves on the research team. We found it far more difficult to get employers to cooperate with the study than we anticipated, and we found it difficult, even when we were speaking with them, to get actionable information, to get something solid enough to say there is or there isn't a need. And I'm not sure exactly, I'm sure many others in the room have a lot of experience with this. I'm really not sure why these barriers exist, but they do exist, and virtually all the respondents that we talked to in this study said they exist as well, and so it may be worth thinking about ways. I think the workforce boards were intended to take this on as part of their mission, and it doesn't seem like they're generally doing it very effectively.
And I think that varies by region. In talking with the TWC, the effectiveness of the workforce development boards varies considerably. One of the big problems that all of them have is that when you're talking about emerging occupations, the workforce development boards are generally made up of people who have established businesses and that sort of thing. They're not like the new businesses coming online and that sort of thing. So getting a handle on those emerging occupations seems to be the biggest problem.
Well, there's also an issue in terms of the size of the business entity. So much of what you just referred to tend to be small businesses. And so You've got very large corporations and you've got small businesses, and a significant number of people are associated with the small businesses. And so it's not sort of a monolithic group that one can address in the same way, and we need to find a way to do it. We actually convened a group of individuals from the tech industry 3 or 4 years ago, and frankly, it wasn't very useful.
It's hard to get them together.
Well, we got them together. It was hard. They didn't really share much useful information. And we talked with someone yesterday that has a tool, and perhaps Charles could elaborate, but he mentioned one of the challenges now with so much being done electronically that it's not totally certain that some of the employers are really getting at some of the real personal characteristics of individuals beyond what you can do in terms of keywords. And so there's just a change in the way people are trying to identify employees and work with them that we have to get attuned to. At the same time, I think businesses need to do that as well. So I think everyone's perhaps in a bit of a learning mode right now, but we need to find a better way of doing it. Do you want to add to that, Charles?
Well, I think that's a good point. And we did yesterday, the staff and I reviewed one of the commercial products that's in particular has analysis of online job postings. And I think that analysis of online job postings may begin to address some of these needs because the providers are increasingly developing content analysis tools, so they can not just tell you there were 500 positions in computer systems analysts, but here are the key competencies or skills that those positions have called for. And so that may be a way of getting information. What the institutions told us is that they typically use the numerical data sources, the statistical data sources, to identify needs, as well as the conversation with the employers. And then they would go to these job posting analysis tools only when they already have a proposed program in mind and they want to refine the learning objectives. So now they really want to drill down and say, okay, well, what do we actually need to accomplish? So they're not, I don't think, using those kind of tools for more general environmental scanning. And I don't know, because those tools are new and we are all inexperienced with them, I don't know what the potential is, but it's something we can continue to look at.
I think a couple of things we have to do. I think you brought up the capacity. We need to do a better job of that, and because we do have to bring that up every time somebody proposes a program, and it would help institutional planning if we had a real tool in place to do that. So I think that's one real takeaway for this. Another aspect is, if you remember the matrix, that bottom left-hand corner where you've got a low supply and a high demand. We've talked, at least some internally in the past, about whether we need to try to identify for institutions some programs for which there is this missing aspect, rather than just waiting for them to propose programs, because frequently and this doesn't happen as much at the community colleges, but often at universities, degree programs are sort of generated by faculty members who haven't really tied in directly to that link, and they may be good programs, but they're not. There isn't the thought in terms of the job market. So, at least on the other end, we might be able to use this process to identify some programs. A few years ago, with regional planning, one thing we did identify was that everyone was wanting educational administration programs, but South Texas actually didn't have any doctoral program in curriculum and instruction. And we let them know that, and a couple of institutions switched their proposal to curriculum and instruction because they weren't producing anyone in that part of the state in that area. So we're going to look at it, are there ways to do that better? And I think some of the things Charles has mentioned can help us do that.
Great. Any other questions? Charles, thank you very much. We'll look forward to seeing you again very soon.
We're just going to have Charles move to Texas.
Yeah, it might be easier that way. Agenda item 5E is a report on facilities projects that were submitted to the coordinating board. Susan Brown, Assistant Commissioner, Planning and Accountability, will be available to answer any questions. Do you have anything to lead off with?
Yes, and we only had one that didn't meet all the standards, and that was a parking garage. It was the parking area of that building. I think it has to do with the location and being able to do the ramps in and out and all of that at that location. So, and that was the only one that did not meet our standards. And that was.
Any other questions?
Questions?
Okay. Agenda item 5F is an update on the Texas Higher Education Strategic Planning Committee activities. Dr. David Gardner, Deputy Commissioner, Academic Planning, Policy Chief Academic Officer, and Susan Brown, Assistant Commissioner, Planning and Accountability, will provide the update that we're all anxiously waiting to hear.
That may be about the length of my report.
We're working.
Report.
Yes. I reported to you earlier the 4 working goals of the plan, and we're developing nuances for that, but they're still out there. I won't go through those again. I think what's important is at the very next meeting of the Planning Committee, they're going to begin to talk about targets that help us achieve those goals, some numerical targets to help achieve those, and some specific strategies that will help us achieve those. So statewide, what are the 2, 3, 4 things that we'd like to propose that everybody undertake? The one other point I'd like to make is I hope all of you are planning to attend the Governing Board Conference, because at that time we are going to focus specifically on the plan. We're going to focus it around the 4 proposed goals. We're going to bring in a couple of key speakers for each of those goals that will provide some ideas for potentially strategies. And then the regents and administrators will break into groups and discuss those separately, and we hope to have members of the Planning Committee helping lead those discussions. So it's going to be very much centered on that. We got their initial input, you may recall, last fall, and so this is a feedback loop to them, and we're hoping this goes to you in July, so we're getting some early feedback from the field.
I'll look forward to that process, because I think that's probably as good a forum as any to get that kind of feedback from where they stand at the moment. Right?
Is any of this goals thing posted on our website? Is there any of the
There is, but we will send it all to you.
Yeah, I must have missed the briefing on the goals because I wasn't familiar with them.
Okay. Well, I'd be glad even today to go through it in any detail you want.
Okay. All right, agenda item 5G is adjournment. Is there any further discussion? I'm sorry,
One
Commissioner.
small.
Oh, fine.
This will take about as much time, less time than David's comment. I would simply like to introduce the new executive assistant to the commissioner, taking Judy Schooling's place. Some of you have already met her, Angelica Reyes. We're lucky to have her. She just came to us from being the executive assistant to the dean of the UT Law School, and she will be a primary point of contact with the board and with institutions of higher education all over the state. So, Angelica, welcome aboard.
Welcome. We look forward to working with you.
That was it.
Great. Thank you, Commissioner.
I met her earlier, and I told her, I said, boy, we sure hope you're an improvement over old Judy. Linda was going,
mic off. All right, so now I'll go back to agenda item 5G.
Second.
All in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed, thank you. Yes.
yes, ma'am. Wow. You should have seen him. It was like, I can't